Hi everyone, 0.3 has been out for almost a week now, and if you have played through the endgame, you will have noticed that there is a lot of crafting that is now in the game. So I keep getting a lot of questions about how can I make these kind of items here in SSF. Well, I'm level 96 first of all, so I've been obviously playing quite a lot, looking at this here. But yeah, it turns out that you can now make much bigger items than in the past, where we only had like this vision crafting, slamming items 6 times, and that was about it for the most part. And these days we actually have a lot of tools. So I want to go through them a little bit with the new abyssal crafting and give you also some examples so that you a bit understand like how to progress your gear, how to like make decisions about, which omens to use, for example, when to desecrate an item, and how you can get the most out of this. But just to give you a bit of an idea, these are the items that I am currently wearing, which are extremely high quality for SSF standards. Like comparing this to like the previous 6 or 7 characters that I have played in season like 0.1 and 0.2. The gear that I have right now is miles ahead of all of my other characters, basically. So we have definitely gotten a massive upgrade here. And if you're smart about using your materials and currencies, then you can make some pretty big stuff. So let's start with a few basics. When you look at an item, first of all, you need to know there can be up to 3 prefixes and up to 3 suffixes. So this is something that you can use to your advantage because you can only have so many of one or the other. So in some cases, you can, for example, force to exalt slam only a prefix if the suffixes are already filled up. There's also omens that do that you can do where it's only prefixes, for example, with something like the omen of sinistral exaltation. There's also one for like regal, I believe, and stuff like that. There's also something like this here where sometimes you can modify only one or the other side. So this can be helpful in some crafting projects where you want to only modify one side or you want to try to finish one side. For example, the prefixes on a weapon are always like the big thing here with like the fizz combo, and then the suffixes you can kind of do whatever you want. One good tool that helps with this is, for example, also going to Path of Exile. So if you go to the Path of Exile PoE2 page, and then let's say we take the crossbow here, you can also look at what are the weights, what are the possible stats on both the prefixes and the suffixes, and also the tags, which can be quite important. There's an omen, for example, where you can exalt slam or regal a stat that has a similar tag as one that is already present. So in some cases you can find combinations of stats where there is no other stat besides the one you're trying to hit, because there's only so few options and it has exactly this tag. In some cases you can force the item to roll a certain thing as well with that. But just as a general idea, if you don't know all the stats by heart that can roll on your gear, it's always worth checking this out. Now, Path of Exile is not necessarily always up to date. PoE 2DB is usually a bit ahead of the curve here. And for example, we also have all of the desecrated modifiers. So you have like a bunch of stuff here on this website. I will also link this down in the description. But for example, you can go to modifiers here and you can also see like, all the different item types. And then, for example, you click on one of these things. Then you can also see like what are the val modifiers that you can get, what are the desecrated modifiers, and they also have like the weight here, the item level requirements, so you can kind of like see what everything rolls. Now, how do you actually go about crafting an item? Where do you start exactly? Well, that depends a bit on like what is the base item that you find. So let's like make some examples here. So we have like a blue base, a white base, and a yellow base. And let's say we found all of these on the ground, and each of them has like their own kind of like upsides and things you can do with them. The general guideline that you need to follow is that once you add something to an item, you can usually not really undo that. So you can't really go backwards. Now, technically you can with especially like, trade league and the currency exchange. You could, for example, go on Normans, or you can do chaos orb spam, but more often than not, this actually just results in the item being effectively destroyed. And when it comes to SSF, you just don't really have enough of that. So these are kind of like these last resort options in most cases, where you can just like YOLO and see what happens. But once you add something, usually this is gonna stay. Or you can use something like the new Essence of Abyss, where you can remove a random modifier. It's basically like a chaos orb, but it adds like a thing that you can unveil to desecrated mods. So it can be sometimes helpful to try to save an item, or these perfect essences. So in some cases, for example, the perfect essence of haste for the martial weapons is insane. You get onslaught there, and also the perfect essence of battle. So when it comes to like, for example, the crossbows, bows, like any kind of like, melee weapon and so on, you can guarantee 2 really good suffixes just thanks to those 2 essences without having a risk of destroying the rest of the item. So this can be kind of nice because both of these modifiers here are suffixes, and when you have a crossbow like this where both the prefixes and the suffixes are filled, it can only remove a suffix and then add this new essence modifier as another suffix. You see this here, this was exactly what I have done on my crossbow. It has a +6 level to attack skills from the Essence of Battle, and in that case, it took like a strength modifier that I had on my crossbow and it made it into the +6. And now if I really want to YOLO, I would do the same with the onslaught, and it could hit either the attack speed, the reduced attack requirements, or the attack skills. So since I have enough essences, I could just put the attack skills back, but I didn't want to risk removing the attack speed. So I kind of kept it as it is. And this would be somewhat similar with, for example, this body armor here as well. So do you see this already has 6 mods? You can see also the tiers on the right side. T1 is the best. And then it goes up depending on which stat. There's like multiple tiers per stat. Some of them go to like T13 or something, like life rolls, for example. Some of them have only 2 tiers, some of them have only 3 tiers, and so on. But T1 is the best, and you also have here like 6 stats already. But you see we have like a T10 evasion rating, for example, which is not very great. So in that case, you could do like a Chaos Orb, or you could do something like an Essence of the Abyss to try to like, remove like this T10 mod, or like something else basically, and that is like not really desirable if the rest of the item is already good. Now here we have a bunch of stats that are not really great. We have a nice life roll, this is okay. We have the deflection thing, which is nice. We have a good lightning res roll, but then 3 kind of bad stats. So on this item I wouldn't really waste much, at least at this stage in my progression. I have really good gear with like 6 out of 6 good stats on every piece basically. So I wouldn't really try hard on this thing. But earlier on, if you're like, in like yellow maps or so, this is a decent item. Now, what you can do when you have an item like this, where it's like, okay, you don't really want to do anything with it. I have my Recombinator tab, and I do a lot of recombination. So for example, I can take this thing now, and it has like a T1 life roll, right? And then I can try to do something else. So this one here, for example, has a deflection roll as well, like a pretty juicy one. And I want to have those 2 stats. Then when you have expedition mods, you can actually select this and this. It doesn't necessarily have a very high chance to come out, but sometimes you can also save your failed crafts and try to salvage them again through the Recombinator. So the chances are not great, and most of the time they're even lower than this. And sometimes when you take like really good stats, it's like a 5% chance to succeed, but it's usually better than nothing if it's an item that is like barely worth saving anyway. Like in this case where I have like 3 bad stats, I wouldn't really try Chaos Orbing it or something like that, because okay, if there's 1 bad stat, maybe you can save it, but with this, there's nothing to do really. There's one little trick you can do with the Recombinator, which is the Fracturing Orb. So when you have a fractured stat on an item, which is like this here basically, that's a physical damage mod, for example, if you recombinate and it chooses this item, the fractured mod will come into the result for free. So that is kind of a huge thing as well in some cases, where maybe you have an item like this, and then I want to like to recombinate, and you can basically select some kind of like lower tier stats that are still somewhat useful in some cases, maybe like a attack speed roll or something like that, or like there's like a tier 2 or tier 3 roll of one or the other thing, like this for example. And if it chooses this outcome here as like this base, it chooses either one or the other, then the fractured mod will be on the resulting item as well, and it does not cost any success chance. So there's like a little trick with recombinating with the fracturing orbs. Now let's move on and talk about an example for like a blue item here. So we have this chest here. Let's say I picked this up from the ground. It actually comes with like 2 really good rolls here: T2 lightning res, T2 increased evasion rating. Now we actually have a bunch of options, but obviously we have to make it rare first. So the main option for that is to just use regals. So we have the normal, and then we also have the greater and the perfect, same as the exalted and the chaos orbs. So these days we have these higher tier crafting currencies, and you see it changes the minimum modifier level. So here is minimum modifier level 35, here is 50. It's the same for the other 2 as well. And this means that it basically cuts off some of the like really low ranges, like for example, minimum modifier level 35. It removes like tier 13 and tier 12 and tier 11 life rolls, like 5 life or 10 life or something. And then the minimum we can roll is maybe like 25 life or something. And then it goes up from there. And, similar with like resistances, for example, it removes like, the lowest tiers basically of everything, so that generally you have a better result. Now, obviously these things are a lot more rare. So in SSF, you know, I've gotten a whole 3 perfect Exalted Orbs, for example. These things are extremely rare, and like 1 perfect Chaos Orb. So yeah, I imagine in Trade League they also cost quite a lot, so you can't really use them that often. But for example, for some mid-range crafting projects, you do find the greater ones relatively reliably, I would say. So I've definitely used a bunch of these, and I was also making some great items with those. You don't necessarily have to go for the perfect ones. Obviously, it increases the odds of getting something good, but they can probably be quite pricey and really rare. So this is only something for like the GG items that you're trying to do. You also have essences to make items at rares. So essence farming is very, very powerful, and we have really good mods that you can put on some items. In fact, some of these essence modifiers are stronger than what you can otherwise roll, even with a T1 roll on an item. So here's a good example. The Greater Essence of Haste on the martial weapon gives you 25% attack speed. This is actually what I have here on mine, and I actually use the essence modifier for this. You see, it doesn't even say it as a tier. So this is just like a special essence modifier, because the regular attack speed roll can only go to 19. So this is actually crazy for crossbows, for example. And it might be similar for other martial weapons. I haven't really checked that. But for example, in some cases, if you want to make the best item possible, you actually need to use the essence, because it can be higher than what you can otherwise get. In most cases, though, it's lower. So another example for that would be the Greater Essence of Abrasion, which is the flat physical damage for melee or ranged weapons. And this is a tier 3 roll. So you see here, for example, I have a tier 1 roll. This goes to like 55 to 94 top end. And this is the tier 3 roll here. So this is 35 to 59. So this is only like 2/3 or so of the power of the T1 roll. So, you know, for a mid-range crafting project, it is fine to use this essence, for example. This is actually what I've done earlier when I was progressing, because I was just trying to get like a crossbow that had like a % fizz roll or something like that, and then I would essence the flat fizz on it, because without a flat fizz, my crossbow would be useless anyway. So I was just trying to like make a weapon like that, and this was like one of my previous crossbows, for example. If you look at so I was just trying to find like my old example here, but I think I've actually overwritten this with the meme item basically. But if you have like one of those cases where you come with like a good fizz roll, so if you look at what we have here, this, for example, this is like a T2 increased fizz roll. This is very good. And this is like almost as good as it gets, and it's like the main thing that you have to try to get on your crossbow or any other martial weapon for the most part, besides the flat fizz, basically. So in this case, you can decide to go for like a smaller crafting project, basically, where there's like less RNG and you have like a guaranteed outcome pretty much that is like half decent, which is using the Greater Essence of Abrasion. But remember, this can only be a tier 3 roll, and obviously you want to get higher. Or you go for the attack speed here. So in this case, I would definitely take the attack speed, because this is like a base where, you know, I would like to invest more and go ham. So I would use the attack speed one and then try to just like slam the prefix physical damage and just try to get lucky with that, for example. But there can also be other cases where we have something a bit on the lower end here. So we can look at some other examples. I have a bunch of stuff here in my stash. So for example, this one. This one has a tier 2 hybrid roll with a 68% increased physical. And let's say, you know, I'm just kind of like level 80, progressing through yellow maps and I find this thing. Then, yeah, this might be a decent upgrade already if I just hit a bit of like flat fizz and I throw the essence on it and then kind of like hope for the best with exalt slamming afterwards or so. So the TLDR is, essences are really good in order to decide, okay, like how ham do you want to go with your crafting project. So for example, if we use the attack speed essence, you know, as I said earlier, then we can use the other, like the essence of battle, where we get the extra attack skill ranks. So this is basically like a requirement now on every single martial weapon. You just have +6 to all attack skills, no matter what. This is like guaranteed basically in the future because of this essence, at least after like a certain level of progression. So, you know, making the attack speed is obviously the better result, but we also have a risk of removing the attack speed again once you put the essence of battle. So you have to kind of like decide, okay, like what is the like expected outcome? How good does the weapon have to be an upgrade as you progress? And then when you go for like the late game crafting projects, then obviously you can try it like a little bit more, because you find more bases, you have more and more attempts, and eventually you will get the thing that you're looking for. But if you go back to our like blue chest here, for example, there's a bunch of different options that would all make sense here. So you can take the life essence, but unfortunately this is like a relatively low roll. I think it's also something like a T3 or T4 roll for most items or something like that. And for example, in the body armor, this goes to 119 maximum life, where Well, other body armors can have a lot more. So you see here T1 goes to 214. This is almost double. So the essence here is actually a relatively low value for life in some of those cases, but it is also a guaranteed life. So again, if you're doing like some kind of like a lower end crafting, then the life essence can be nice to just throw in there if you need it. But for example, you have stuff like the chaos res, you have stuff like the elemental resistances. So you see here it goes to 35 fire res, and that is, I think, like a T3 roll. And this is like a relatively juicy chunk of resistances already. So in this case, I would most likely go for one of the resistance essences actually, and then just hope that I can slam the life on it. Or you can also use the perfect essence of the body, which is usually even more powerful than just a flat life on the chest. So if I wanted to make like a big life chest, like an innovation chest or something out of this, then I would probably go for a suffix essence like this here, put a lot of res on this thing, hope to get lucky with maybe the next hold or so, and then at the end put the perfect essence of the body. And then you would most likely have a decent chest. And finally, we have the white item bases. So this is usually the real crafting bases that you are looking for, that you pick up on the ground, and then you kind of like decide on the fly, are you gonna keep it or not? And here is where we have the most options available. Most importantly, because of the transmutes, we get one magic modifier, and effectively what this means is that you can just keep rolling over and over with new bases that you find until you get exactly the big mod that you are looking for. So again, back to this crossbow example, we have like this, big fizz modifier or something like that, or like a, T1 flat fizz or T1% fizz or these kind of things. Like here on my prefixes, for example, I think this crossbow also started out with me transmuting the T1 flat fizz, for example, and then I started crafting further and further with this thing. And it would be similar here. So you have these transmutes here. Usually you want to reserve the normal transmutes and augments for not crafting really these days, since we get plenty of these tier 3 and tier 3. Since we get plenty of these tier 2 and tier 3 transmutes and also augmentations, you see have a lot of them. Even as SSF, you can actually reliably use them for crafting. So especially the tier 2s, I use them quite often, and I just kind of like throw this on there. And you see here we got a really good mod. We got a tier 2 deflection rating mod. So in this case, this is something that I actually want to have. It's actually like one of the stats I'm looking for on the chest. It's on the best base as well that I want. And now I would have to decide, okay, what to do with my next step, which would be augmentation. So if it's like some kind of like, yeah, it's an okay roll, and I don't really want to invest into it, and I would maybe just for a normal augmentation. But in this case, this is like almost perfect. And I would probably use the perfect orb of augmentation as well to guarantee the highest possible modifier level. The blue ones are actually a bit better than the like rare crafting currencies. So you see here on the greater transmute, the minimum modifier level is 55, which is even better than the perfect, regal, exalt, and so on. So this is already pretty high. And then the perfect ones go to 70. So you effectively cut off almost all of the, like, starting from tier 3 mods or something like that. So if I get like a life roll with a perfect augment now, this will almost guaranteed be like 150 plus or so. And we can see what we get with a perfect one. And well, we got a T1 hybrid evasion and life roll. This is actually very good as well. So this is like one of those cases where we have two really good stats. Obviously, we still want like the big evasion. I want the big life, for example. Or maybe this is also a stat where maybe later I would throw the essence of the body to try to remove that prefix that I just got, and then get like the juicy life roll as well with this thing here, for example. But for now, this is definitely a base where we can keep going. The thing is, it doesn't necessarily always work out that way so easily. So if you look at, maybe some other examples, I'm just going to take a bunch of these boots here. And here again, maybe we'll try to hit something like movement speed at the start, or like a good resistance, or like a rarity roll or something, or the deflection roll again on the boots. So here, this is a juicy res. Here, there's a stun threshold. This is something I don't really want. So I would maybe just YOLO like a normal augmentation and see if I get something. And in fact, I got tier 1 life, which is kind of lucky after getting unlucky with the stun threshold. So here I would decide maybe for on like the lower end crafting side, okay, maybe I'm going to throw a normal regal, see what we get. Yay, we got movement speed 10%. Yeah, so this is like something that goes into Recombinator tab. Goodbye. And here we have something pretty decent. So I would throw like a augmentation, and we got a T1% evasion. This is pretty decent, but we don't have a movement roll yet. And for example, for boots, I would really like to have movement even on a blue item already, because this is like a requirement for a pair of boots to exist. And I don't really want to waste my good currencies trying to slam on like a 30% movement speed or something like that. So I'll probably just YOLO with like a normal regal. I got stun threshold, and this is like basically a failed crafting project now, and goes to the vendor. And basically, as I go through the map, I will pick up some of these bases here that I don't necessarily want to go back to the stash for. But basically, as I'm running, you know, I play WSD, I can actually like do all of this while running, which is very nice. But you know, I will pick up an item from the ground, and then I see, okay, this is the best base. I'm gonna throw a transmute here. I got something pretty decent. I'm gonna throw an augment here. I got something bad. I'll throw this out. Goodbye. And then the same here. We do this. Evasion is fine. We do this. Some cold dress. Okay, maybe gonna do this. 6 dexterity. Goodbye. And you know, kind of the same here. We got some nice accuracy. We got some nice cold dress, but I don't care that much about the accuracy, so I'm gonna do a normal regal. And we got rarity. So now this is something where we would like to continue crafting. For example, try to slam some life. And, you know, maybe some other res or something like that, and this could be a pretty good helm. So that's something I will keep and maybe bring back to the stash to then throw into my craft tab here. And later on I will have like 10 of those kind of helms that are like half finished and throw them in there. Just to like show you this in action a little bit more, like I have like a bunch of boots here and like a helm in like different stages, for example. So here's like some of those blue items. So this is like something where I did exactly this, like in the map, I picked up this thing. I transmute, I augment, and then I get something like this here. And this is like a really good start. And then we have to decide what to do next. And similar here, we have like a decent evasion roll and lightning res, but no movement speed, unfortunately. We have a 35% movement speed boots and 22 life regen, which is also tier 1, but life regen is usually not something I'm looking for. And we have this hammer I just made. So what do we do now to go about crafting any of those? So first of all, with those boots here, I'm gonna like transmute them. So we have to decide, okay, do we go perfect transmute or do we do greater transmute? On like the really high bases where you want to try to hit like a specific mod, stuff like a T1 movement speed roll on a 82 plus pair of boots, it would definitely be worth to throw perfect transmute and perfect augmentation, for example. And maybe similar with some weapons where you try to hit like the T1 fizz or something like that. So in those cases, there are these stats that are like really coveted and pretty rare. It would make sense to go for the perfect ones. But for typical crafting, I just use the greater ones because they just like drop a lot more. And I reserve those perfect ones for really only the good bases. But yeah, we see here, we got some nice dex on this one. We got some nice rarity on this one. So in this case, we proceed with the greater. And we'll see what we get. Here's again evasion. So these are kind of similar. And now we could see, okay, do we want to use like, for example, a greater regal or normal regal or an essence here? I think for the most part, when it comes to boots, movement speed is so important that I would generally regal this in this case if it doesn't already come with movement speed. Just kind of like hope for the best, basically. So in this case, let's just use like the greater one here and we see if we can get some nice movement speed, for example, on this one here. And I got deflection, which is also a very good roll to have that I want. But it still doesn't have movement speed. So yeah, it does have 3 decent mods with pretty high tiers. And some stuff that I want. Let's say I want lightning res really badly. And then deflection is something that I'm stacking. So this is kind of nice. And it has decent evasion on a good base. But no movement speed, no life yet. So this is kind of tough. So in this case, you kind of just have to YOLO it and see what you get. So you could use the greater exalted if you have enough of those. And you can, for example, also do the double exalt slam in those cases. So these are pretty plentiful with the 2 modifiers here from the greater exaltation mod. And this is something I've done on some of these items where I just slam 2 things at the same time because it's very easy to get these omens, but it's not very easy to get these greater or especially perfect exalted orbs. But in this case, I actually have more greater exalted orbs than I have these omens right now. But on the other hand, I think the chances are relatively low that this item will go anywhere, but we can try our luck. I'm going to use a normal exalted and just see if I get lucky. We did get a rarity, but a relatively low tier. And at this point, I would say I would probably not really try anymore. This is like a good for like an early game item, but you know, we don't really have high chances of getting anything. And at this point, the item is relatively dead because now I slammed a second prefix and it is not life or movement speed. And I want to have one or the other. So this is like effectively dead. However, if you are like especially in Trade League, you can use something like Essence of Hysteria. So this one, for example, on the boots gives you the first and movement speed modifier by removing and augmenting a rare with a random guaranteed modifier. So this is similar to the perfect essence of battle that we had on the crossbow earlier, where if all of the stats are filled, then it can only take a prefix and then add the other prefix. So let's say we slam this pair of boots one more time and we get a juicy life roll, which we did not get. We got 12 mana. But imagine this was like a juicy life roll. Then we could actually use this essence here to try to like remove this, you know, stun threshold, evasion rating, hybrid stat here, for example, and hit that with the 1 in 3 chance. And then we suddenly would have a pretty decent pair of boots, for example, that has, you know, 3 suffixes that we actually care about, not with the perfect tiers, but then we would have, you know, furthest movement speed, good life, and we would have a good pair of boots. The thing that I made here now just goes straight to the vendor. Just didn't actually really work out, and we can try one of the other examples. So I guess the most interesting one is probably this one, because it already comes with like a really good suffix T1 dex, and it has 30 movement speed, so this is like basically as good as it gets for the most part to get started here. And what I would probably do here is something like a Chaos Essence, because Chaos Rest is really hard to come by. And you can also use one of the other Res Essences, for example, because again, these have relatively good values compared to what you can normally roll. There is also, for example, the Opulence Essence, this is Rarity, so it's also really nice to have. So I'll probably use one of those to guarantee like a pretty chunky roll of something I actually want. So in my case, my current boots, for example, actually do have Chaos Rest on them, and I'm just going to use the Chaos Essence here, and boom, here we go. And now we actually have an angle for probably something like a double Greater Exile Slam or so, because we have these pretty good mods here, and then we can see what we get. You see my current boots here, they also have Rarity. This is T1, it's a little bit more. They do have the Deflection, they do have the Chaos Rest. So I would actually like to get maybe some Rarity back. Deflection, I do have a decent amount, so maybe I don't care that much about getting this unless I get a really good one. But yeah, my current boots can easily be beaten. The life roll is also not really great. So I think this would be an angle for a double Greater Exalt Slam, which we're about to do. So we take this Omen, and then we do our Greater Exalt. So we have to activate the Omen. The way this works is that you right click it, and then you see it has this outline, and this means it's active. And you can also sometimes combine this with other omens. So you can actually have multiple omens active at the same time that you all consume at the same time. So as an example, you can also do the omen of Sinistral Exaltation, where we can only add prefix modifiers. So in this case, we can double slam 2 prefixes on this thing. And this can also be really helpful to decide then, okay, what do we do next? Because if I fill the prefixes, then there's only 1 suffix slot left. We have 3 stats, it will be 5. And then there's only 1 suffix. And then we can, for example, also desecrate stuff with the new Abyss items. So we have this here where we desecrate an armor piece, for example. And in this case, we can force this thing to be the suffix. And most likely I want the suffix because there's resistances to Unveil. There's a bunch of other good stats that we can get. So I would actually go for this double Exalt prefix slam and try to hit some chunky life roll, for example. So this is our main objective right now, and maybe some other evasion roll or something like that, or even like the hybrid evasion and life roll. That would be ideal. So that's what we're gonna do. Double Greater Exalt, and here we go. We got mana and life with an okay number. So now we have boots that are actually somewhat competitive with what I currently use. 30 movement, 90 life. The mana could be helpful depending on what you're running. And in this case now we can actually do a desecration. I accidentally just used the campaign version of that, but we have another one here, so we do this. And now we can unveil something. So now we have this, and we have the option to get 1 out of 3 modifiers when we go to the Well of Souls. And like this, you can actually relatively reliably finish your item with something at least half decent, sometimes something really good. And there's also modifiers that exist only from the desecration that you can get there. For example, some hybrid like attribute nodes, or some hybrid like resistances things here. For example, like on my ring, I did this. You see this green modifier at the bottom, fire and chaos res. This is like completely insane. And this is something similar to what we hoped we would unveil now with our boots. Now, in the case that this would be like a really good item, let's say we'd have like a T1 life roll here, you can also go for the reroll on the unveil. So this is the Omen of Abyssal Echoes. If you have an item where this is like such a good piece, after investing all the other stuff in there, you slam some really good stuff, then you can also get 2 chances at unveiling this. I wouldn't really do this on this pair of boots because this thing is incredibly rare, but I have done it, for example, on my crossbow here. So I did the reroll, unveil, And like the first round was just like a lot of trash, and then the second round I got at least a little bit of the physical percent with this green mod here that you see, and this was the result of the unveiling. But in the case of this boot, I'm just gonna like YOLO it and see what we get, and hopefully we get some nice resistance or something like that. And yeah, this is kind of awful, to be honest. So we have 11 cold rest. This is probably what I would choose here, or maybe the dodge roll distance, because I don't really need the cold, for example. So this would make it a little bit faster while mapping or so, but realistically, not really something I would like to get. But it's still a good pair of boots, and we can still try to do something else here. So we could now try to chaos away this unveil that we just got. It's a 1 in 6 chance to hit the chaos, so not really good, but potentially we could hit the life as well and get even more life on it. Or, you know, maybe hit the chaos res and we get like some other T1 res, which would be okay. So there's a bunch of things now if we just like chaos spam this item a little bit, and we could try. So this is probably what I would do here. So let's try this out. So now we got the chaos res and the fire res, and I think we had the rarity before or something like that, right? So this is still something that is like an okay pair of boots, I guess, for like a mid-range crafting project, but we still want to get rid of the dodge roll distance here. And now we replaced the life with less life, unfortunately. So we're getting to the point where this is not really worth crafting on this thing anymore, because we still have to get rid of this one suffix of the dodge roll distance. The fires is not great, the chaos is okay, and yeah, we have kind of low evasion. So I probably wouldn't really try much more on this unless you're kind of desperate, or you know, you really need to hit like a new pair of boots or something. So you could maybe throw another one on this. And by now we have actually removed the life completely, and we got this evasion and stun threshold. So this is definitely a point where I would say, okay, this goes into the Recombinator tab, and I would like recombinate maybe the movement speed, the chaos res, and then like, for example, the chunky life roll from this other pair of boots. So this is something we can try to do here. So when you go to Recombinator, then we can take this pair of boots that I just made, or destroyed rather. We take this, and then here, and we see we have a 6% chance, but we can try to salvage what we made here and see if we get something. In some cases, as I mentioned earlier with the fracturing orb, we can do some trickery here, where we can maybe fracture one of the good mods, and then we have like a much higher chance by picking some of the lower tier modifiers. So let's just imagine we had like a fractured movement speed, then you know, I take the life, I take the chaos res, and suddenly my chances are like 3 times as good for hitting this outcome. And if it chooses this base, then I would have the fractured movement speed for free, for example. In our case, that's not really happening though. But there's also an omen that allows you to get lucky on the recombinate, which is the omen of recombination. So if you have one of those cases where you really want to try to, you know, preserve your T1 crazy, like, I don't know, maybe crossbow fizz roll, and then the other T1 crossbow with, you know, 1% and 1 flat or something like that, it could definitely be worth it to go for the lucky, which means that it rolls the chance twice, and if one of them succeeds, you'll get to keep the item, and potentially you can go from there. But in our case, we're not going to do that. I have only one of those things, so I'm just going to try my luck, and maybe this thing is going to come out. Or, for example, here, if you really want to, you know, just have a better chance, you can also do this. 23% is maybe better. So I'm not going to go for the chaos now and see if an item comes out, but it doesn't. But yeah, these are some of the basics of, like, for example, how I approach making items when, especially SSF. I guess in Trade League, things might be a bit different because you might not really necessarily care spam items too much and, you know, potentially destroy them and so on. And you do have more options available with like going for more of the omens. There can be a lot more complicated crafts with, you know, using a lot of this stuff where, you, for example, you only slam suffixes, or you have like this with only similar modifiers on some certain item types. This can be really useful and so on. But for the most part, you basically have to decide, okay, what is the base? Is it worth to invest, like, for example, the greater transmutes and the greater augments? Or is it, you know, it's just like a YOLO project, like I just throw whatever I got and hope for the best. So in some cases I do that, you know, just like have a bunch of belts here, and I don't really care about belts anymore. I was going to use my normal transmutes. You know, if any of them rolls well, then yeah, maybe I'll keep it, otherwise no. You see here most of the time nothing really comes out of this, so goodbye. And in other cases you get a good start like this here, and then okay, do you do the essence, do you do the greater regal, and you just kind of have to, you know, think about, okay, what are the things you're trying to hit, what are the stats that are really important, and how likely can you get them, either from, for example, the essence or from exalting later on. And looking at the rest of my gear here, you see that almost everything here actually has a desecrated unveiled modifier. So most of the time I finish up my items with an unveil, which unfortunately very often gives you like a pretty low tier of a modifier, but you at least have the option to choose between 3 different ones, which is kind of nice. So here I got, for example, some damage. Here I got my fizz. Here I got this insane fire and chaos res. This one was just fine without anything. Here there was just a prefix. There's no other prefix that would matter for me, so I just threw this on there as the last thing, and I got actually something half useful, I guess. Here again we got some like juicy evasion, for example, after I crafted all the rest of the item. Here again we unveiled fist damage, which is very nice, but tier 3, that's okay. Here got some deflection rating, this is very good. And here also we got some rarity unveil. So I see that sometimes I get like pretty good unveils. Sometimes it's a bit kind of mid or so with like the T4 fire damage, for example. I don't really care too much, but it is what it is. And depending on, you know, if you want to like risk your like random slam luck with like a greater exalt or a perfect exalt versus do you want to try to have a decent chance of getting something guaranteed at least or almost guaranteed, then you can decide to either desecrate an item towards the end or just, you know, do the last slam, for example. But yeah, we have one more little thing that I want to try now before I finish this. So let's try our 35% movement speed boost. So I'm going to do a Chaos Essence here. And I think this is another double greater exalt slam angle. So this is what I'm going to do. We need to hit some juicy life roll. And we can again do the prefixes, for example. So we do this. And we do the double, which is this. And we can try this again. Or I can even do a perfect exalt slam, because it is 35% after all. It does have the life regen, which I don't really want, but I guess it wouldn't really hurt. So I think I'm going to do a perfect slam here, and we'll see what we get. And we got a lot of evasion rating and no life. So I guess this would be like one of those angles where now we want to try to chaos this, like a greater chaos, for example, to try to hit the prefix and try to get a nice life roll. Or there's also like a chaos, I think only chaos prefix, like omen here, but this is like a really rare one. I actually don't even have a single one of them after farming lots of rituals. So this will be one of those cases where maybe I would like to use one of those, use like a perfect chaos, try to hit that life roll basically. But in our case, we have to YOLO it. So we're gonna do a maybe greater chaos and see what happens. And we got a relatively juicy lightning rest roll. This is actually very good because we got rid of the life regen, which I didn't really want, but we still need that life roll on the prefix. So we try to hit that, and we got another evasion roll. We get a lot of evasion on this thing, but it's not quite it yet. And here we go, we got stun threshold instead of the lightning rest, so we can try another one. And we got rarity instead of the stun threshold, so it's getting better. And now we killed the chaos rest with dexterity. So at this point, yeah, it still has a 35. We can still get lucky, but I don't care that much about the dexterity as much as I cared about the chaos rest. So I'm gonna try a normal chaos, and now it's slowly getting worse. So yeah, I think at this point this goes into the Recombinator tab, and we'll leave it there. But yeah, this is about it for my crafting video here. So this was pretty long now, but I hope that I could give you some examples of, you know, how to use the different currencies available to you, when to decide, you know, going for an essence, either like, you know, for example, to make a blue into yellow, or when you already have like, you know, a pretty much finished item, then using some of the perfect essences, for example. And, you know, when to make decisions about, you know, how to invest, how much to invest into an item, because sometimes with like very little, you can do a lot. Or you just, you know, try your luck with some rolls that you try to hit and see what happens basically. So you always have to decide step by step, okay, how much do you really want to invest into this item? Is it really worth to keep going? Is it worth to try to risk destroying the item? And obviously the higher you go, the more GG your gear becomes, the more risks you will have to take, because there will always just be like a chance to fail outside of like some, you know, very specific, like, you know, guaranteed crafting outcomes that you can force with omens and so on. But even that is like usually some very high-end crafting project that is not really achievable by most people, I think. So I hope this helps you. I wish you good luck with current 0.3 league. I had a lot of fun so far. I'm gonna reroll soon as well after I killed Uber Arbiter. So we are making our way there with our crossbow merc. So this was an absolute blast so far, and let's see what else we discover. If there's anything else, there's certainly like maybe specific crafts that I might want to highlight, how to make this, how to make that, in more detail, for example. But for now, This is just like the general overview. Hope this helps you. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more. See you guys next time.